The crash of 1929 is remembered as the ultimate economic nightmare, a black hole in history that swallowed a generation. But that memory has become a dangerous blindfold. It has convinced you that because we haven't seen lines at soup kitchens lately, the system is safe. This is a lie. We have not discovered a cure for financial collapse. We have simply learned how to delay the execution. The silence you hear in the markets today is not stability. It is the sound of a spring being compressed to its breaking point. Since the end of the Second World War, the frequency of economic downturns has suspiciously declined. We decided that pain was optional. Look at 2020. The global economic machine physically stopped, yet the average person saw their debts decline and their savings increase. That is not a miracle. That is the physiological impossibility in a free market. It is not growth, it is morphine. We have been injecting the economy with sedatives to mask the symptoms of a terminal disease. In 1935, the U.S. Forest Service mandated that every fire be extinguished by 10 a.m. the next morning. They thought they were saving the forest. They were wrong. By suppressing the small, routine burns, they allowed deadwood to accumulate for decades, turning the landscape into a ticking fuel bomb. We have done the exact same thing to your money. We have saved the deadwood companies that were supposed to burn. Now the fuel is stacked high. And when this suppressed volatility finally ignites, the bailouts will not be for you. We have forgotten how to have a recession. And that amnesia is about to cost us everything. We need to reset your memory of what normal looks like. Modern history books have trained you to view the Great Depression as a freak accident, a singular glitch in the matrix. This is a fabrication. If you zoom out, you will realize that for our ancestors, economic chaos was not an anomaly. It was the baseline reality. Between the years 1900 and 1929 alone, the United States endured no less than 9 separate economic crashes. That is a financial collapse occurring, on average, every 3 years. The system did not glide, it convulsed. To understand the true brutality of a non-interventionist economy, we must look at the Panic of 1873. This was not caused by a virus or a housing bubble, but by the era's obsession with railroads. Investors were pouring capital into anything with tracks, blindly trusting the hype of the industrial growth spurt. Then the unthinkable happened. J. Cook & Company, the banking firm financing the Northern Pacific Railway, essentially the Goldman Sachs of its day, collapsed under the weight of its own optimism. There was no Federal Reserve to organize a midnight rescue. There was no deposit insurance to calm the masses. The result was an immediate, unmitigated chain reaction. When the dust settled, nearly 18,000 businesses had failed. Factories went dark, wages were slashed, and the unemployment rate climbed to 14%. This was the raw, unfiltered violence of a free market correcting itself. Barely 20 years later, just as the country believed the Gilded Age would last forever, the floor fell out again in 1893. Overnight, the boom simply stopped. Railroads declared bankruptcy and panic spread like a contagion. In this era, when a bank closed its doors, they stayed closed. If you didn't withdraw your life savings in time, you lost everything, because there was no FDIC to make you whole. The devastation was absolute. Over 500 banks failed, taking 15,000 companies down with them. National unemployment hit 20%, but in some industrial states that number skyrocketed to nearly 50%. Imagine half the working population in your state losing their income simultaneously with zero government safety net to catch them. This wasn't just a recession, it was a societal purge. The human cost of this volatility is best understood through the Pullman strike of 1893. George Pullman had built a utopia for his workers, a company town with manicured streets and decent housing. It looked perfect, until the profit stopped. When the Depression hit, Pullman slashed employee wages by up to 30% to protect his bottom line. However, he refused to lower the rent he charged those same workers for living in his company houses. This is the definition of a trapped system. You earn 30% less, but your fixed costs remain 100% rigid. When the workers naturally revolted and struck, the system did not offer arbitration, it offered league. President Grover Cleveland sent 12,000 federal troops to break the strike and force the trains to move. Riots erupted. Boxcars were torched and 30 workers were left dead in the streets. Looking back, these events seem like a living hell on earth. It was a time when the economy was a wild beast that could not be tamed. But, and this is the critical point that modern economists are terrified to admit, this brutality served a specific function. It was a filtration system. It was creative destruction in its most aggressive form. Bad debts were wiped out. Inefficient railroads were liquidated. The pain was excruciating, but it was real, and it cleared the deadwood to make way for the next cycle of genuine growth. Before we move to the modern era, we must look at the one crisis that proves the system can heal itself without a doctor, the Depression of 1920. Most people have never heard of it because it was over so quickly. Following World War I, the U.S. economy crashed hard. Industrial production fell by 30%, unemployment jumped from 4% to nearly 12%, wholesale prices collapsed by a staggering 36%. It was, by all metrics, a catastrophe comparable to the start of the Great Depression. But the government did something extraordinary. They did nothing. President Warren G. Harding cut the federal budget by nearly half and refused to intervene. He let the wages fall. He let the prices collapse. It was brutal. It was sharp. But because prices fell, goods became affordable again. Because wages adjusted, companies could hire again. By 1922, the economy wasn't just recovering, it was roaring. The roaring 20s were built on the foundation of this clear deadwood. It stands as the ultimate counter-argument to modern economic theory. Sometimes the best medicine is to let the fever break on its own. We looked at that pain, and we decided we never wanted to feel it again. We built institutions to stop the bleeding, but in doing so, we made a Faustian bargain. We traded the acute, sharp pain of purification for a chronic, dull sickness that never ends. We thought we were buying safety. But if you look at the vital signs of our current economy, you will realize we didn't buy safety at all. We just bought time, and now the bill for that time is coming due. We have convinced ourselves that we have solved the problem of economic downturns. Since the end of the Second World War, the frequency and severity of recessions have constantly declined. On the surface, this looks like a triumph of modern economics. We have smoothed the curve. We have tamed the beast. But if you look closer at the mechanics of this stability, you will realize it is not natural health. It is the silence of a patient who has been heavily sedated. To understand why this stability is actually a death sentence, we must look at a forgotten piece of American bureaucratic history, the 10 a.m. policy. Back in the 1800s, American forests burned routinely. These were low-intensity fires that occurred every 10 to 30 years. They were nature's janitors, cleaning out the deadwood and brush before it could pile up. But in the mid-20th century, the U.S. government decided that fire was the enemy. In 1935, the Forest Service formally adopted the 10 a.m. policy, which mandated that every fire reported must be suppressed by 10 a.m. the following morning. They became incredibly efficient at this. With better training, satellite detection, and more resources, they stopped nature from running its course. For decades, the forests looked greener and healthier than ever. But they didn't realize that by stopping every small burn, they were simply postponing the energy release. They were allowing the fuel to accumulate, layer by layer, year after year. By suppressing the small fires, they guaranteed that the next fire would not be a cleaning cycle, but a catastrophic megafire that destroys everything in its path. Economies follow the exact same laws of physics. For the last 40 years, every time the financial market tried to correct itself, every time it tried to burn off its own deadwood, the Federal Reserve and the government stepped in with fire hoses full of cash. This addiction to intervention began in earnest in 1987 with the birth of the Greenspan put. After the Black Monday crash, Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan lowered interest rates to save the market. This sent a signal to Wall Street that the referee was now betting on the game. It told investors that if they made money, it was theirs to keep. But if they lost money, the Fed would bail them out. This created a one-way street of risk. Look at the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s. When the tech sector collapsed, it should have been a moment of cleansing. Instead, interest rates were pushed down to levels not seen since the 1960s. This flooded the system with cheap money. It stopped the pain, yes, but it also encouraged banks to lend to people who couldn't afford it, and hedge funds to package that bad debt into complex instruments. We didn't put out the fire, we just moved the fuel from the tech sector to the housing market. Then came 2008. The subprime mortgage market collapsed, sparking the worst downturn since the Great Depression. This was the moment the forest tried to scream. Major sectors of the financial system were at risk of shutting down. But did we let the deadwood burn? No. In an election year, the government panicked. They pushed an unprecedented $700 billion, 0 cents bailout package through Congress to shore up the very investment banks that caused the crisis. The central bank slashed interest rates to near zero. They purchased the toxic assets, effectively telling the market, recklessness will be rewarded. We masked the symptoms, but the disease, the bad debt, and the moral hazard was left to metastasize. And then we reached the terminal phase, 2020. When COVID-19 shut down the global economy, the logic of capitalism was suspended entirely. The Federal Reserve launched a bazooka of stimulus. Federal spending in response to the virus amounted to nearly $5 trillion, 0 cents. Think about the insanity of that number. At a time when businesses were closed and production had halted, the average person actually saw their financial situation improve. We printed so much money that we broke the connection between work and reward. We watered the forest with gasoline and called it rain. We pat ourselves on the back. We think we are the greatest firefighters in history because the market is at all-time highs. But we are not firefighters. We are arsonists in denial. By refusing to let the weak companies fail, we have filled the economy with a new, terrifying species of creature. They are the walking dead of the corporate world, and they are eating your future alive. They are called the zombie companies. If you look at the S&P 500 today, you see strength. But if you strip away the stock prices and look at the balance sheets, you will find something grotesque. We have populated our economy with the walking dead. In a healthy capitalist system, a company that cannot make a profit dies. It runs out of cash, it defaults, and its assets are sold to someone who can do a better job. This is the law of the jungle. But we have suspended the laws of nature. By keeping interest rates at near zero for the better part of a decade, we have created an environment where failure is no longer a consequence of incompetence. These are the zombie companies. By definition, these are firms that are persistently unprofitable and can only survive by taking on more debt to pay off the interest on their old debt. They are not growing, they are not innovating, they are simply existing, kept in a state of suspended animation by the government's refusal to let the cost of money rise. This is a direct violation of one of the most fundamental principles in economics, creative destruction. The Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter argued that economic downturns are not errors, they are the economy's renewal cycle. Just as the human body needs to detox to get rid of waste, The economy needs recessions to kill off old, bloated, and unproductive companies. Schumpeter believed that when these dinosaurs fall apart, their capital, resources, and workers are released. They flow from the dying industries into ideas worth building. This is how we moved from the horse-drawn carriage to the automobile, from the typewriter to the computer. Destruction is the price of creation, but because we are terrified of the pain, we have stopped the clock. We have blocked the exit. As a result, estimates today suggest that anywhere from 9% to 20% of all companies in established economies are zombies. Think about that. 1 in 5 companies you see is not a business. It is a financial corpse being propped up by cheap credit. Consider the unicorn phenomenon. In the last decade, we saw billions of dollars poured into startups like WeWork, companies that burned cash for years with no path to profitability. In a normal interest rate environment, these ideas would have died in the pitch room. But in a world of free money, they grew into giants, sucking up talent, office space, and attention, only to collapse or stagnate. The consequences of this are far more terrifying than a stock market crash. Because these zombies do not die, they trap capital that should be funding the next Google or Tesla. They hoard workers, resources, and market share, choking off the oxygen for new competitors. We are not seeing a boom in innovation. We are seeing a boom in stagnation. An article by The Economist pointed out the logical conclusion of this trend. If we don't make things anymore, and if we don't let bad companies fail, what is left? We end up with an endemic of corporate consultants, crypto traders, and influencers. These are the symptoms of an economy that has forgotten how to build real value, so it simply shuffles paper and hype around in a circle. We have replaced creative destruction with artificial preservation. We have filled the forest with trees that are dead on the inside, blocking the sunlight for the saplings on the forest floor. Why can't we have both the old yellow cab and the new Uber? Because resources are finite. For the new world to be born, the old world must be allowed to burn. But the people in charge know this. They aren't stupid. They know that keeping zombies alive kills productivity. So why do they do it? Why do they keep the IV drip running? Because the goal isn't productivity. The goal is protection. And this is the darkest part of the story. Keeping these zombies alive isn't just an economic mistake. It is a calculated mechanism to transfer wealth from the savings of the working class directly into the asset portfolios of the elite. Now we arrive at the smoking gun. If you ever feel like you are working harder than your parents did but getting nowhere, you are not crazy. You are the victim of a mathematical crime. To understand this, we have to look at the divergence between productivity and wages. Since the 1970s, workers have become exponentially more efficient. With computers, the internet, and automation, you are creating more value per hour than any generation in history. In a fair system, your paycheck would reflect that. But it doesn't. Since the 1970s, productivity has increased by 87%, while hourly wages have only increased by 33%. You are doing the work, but someone else is taking the money. But here's the detail that the news will never show you. Look closely at when the gap widens. It doesn't happen gradually. The periods after financial crises are when the gaps between wages and productivity gains increase the most. This proves that the rescue packages are not designed for you. This is known as the Cantillon effect. Richard Cantillon, an 18th century economist, observed that when new money is created, it does not enter the economy evenly. It enters at a specific point, usually through the banks and financial institutions. The people closest to the money printer get to spend the cash before prices rise. They buy stocks, bonds, and real estate at yesterday's prices. By the time that money trickles down to your wages, prices have already adjusted upwards. The elite get the purchasing power. You get the inflation. When the government steps in to fix a recession, they print money to bail out the system. That money does not go to the worker on the assembly line. It goes to the asset owners. It flows into the stock market and real estate, inflating the wealth of the people who already own everything, while your wages stay stagnant. The global financial crisis of 2008 was the most blatant example of this theft. It's the worst downturn since the Great Depression. Wall Street had built a house of kindling, fueled by fraudulent subprime mortgages. When it caught fire, the government pushed a $700 billion 0-cents bailout package through Congress. They purchased bad loans from banks to give them money to make more loans. The fraudulent activity went almost entirely unpunished. The message was clear. If you are too big to fail, you can gamble with the nation's economy, keep the profits when you win, and hand the bill to the taxpayer when you lose. And while the banks were recapitalized, the average American was left to rot. We can see this betrayal most clearly in the housing market. In 1985, the median home price represented 3.6 times the average salary. It was achievable. By 2023, that number had shot up to 5.3 times the average salary. Why? Because when the central bank brings interest rates down to zero to save the economy, they make debt cheap for institutional investors. Big businesses and hedge funds are effectively given a golden opportunity to buy the dip with the government's credit card. They buy up the homes, the stocks, and the assets, driving prices up beyond what a working wage can afford. This is the rule of modern economic intervention. Actions that the government and central bank take have done more to help the people who cause these problems than to help those hurt by them. If we let recessions run their course, they will hurt working people more than they help asset owners in the short term. But if we step in to fix them the way we have been, we help asset owners vastly more than we help working people. We have created a system where the wealthy are insured against failure by the public purse, while the poor are left exposed to the full force of inflation and stagnation. You are not just fighting the market, you are fighting the very institutions that claim to protect you. The system is designed to make you lose. It is rigged to protect the elite at the expense of the currency itself. But there is a way to break this cycle. It is a solution that no politician wants to discuss because it involves something they are terrified of. It is a specific type of pain, a necessary cruelty that could actually save us. So, is there a way out of this trap? Yes, but it requires a solution that is considered taboo in the halls of Washington and Wall Street. It requires us to accept that pain is not the enemy. To fix the system, we must relearn the lost art of letting it burn. We know that recessions are a way to detox our economic system so that it doesn't become stuck with excessive fat. This is the only way to trigger true creative destruction. A healthy recession is not an apocalypse. It is a mechanism of evolution. It demands that companies not doing well leave the market, that capital leaves dying industries to find more promising technologies, and that workers move to more productive jobs. When we refuse to let this process happen, we are not saving jobs, we are freezing the economy in amber. We are protecting the past at the expense of the future. The zombie firms need to go to make way for new, innovative companies. If a business cannot survive without cheap debt, it should bankrupt. Its assets, buildings, servers, patents do not vanish. They are sold at a discount to someone smarter, faster, and more efficient. That is how civilization advances. We have a modern example of this courage. In 2008, while the US and Europe were busy bailing out their bankers, Iceland took a different path. Their banking sector had collapsed, dwarfing the size of their entire economy. But instead of saving the banks, Iceland let them fail. They jailed the bankers who committed fraud. They protected the depositors, not the shareholders. It was painful. The currency crashed. Inflation spiked. But then something amazing happened. Because they wiped out the bad debt immediately, the economy reset. Iceland recovered faster and more robustly than almost any other European nation. They took the pain up front and they bought themselves the future. We actually saw a glimpse of what a healthy recession response could look like in 2020, though it was buried under a mountain of bad policy. The specific decision to send stimulus checks directly to households, giving cash directly to citizens, was fundamentally different from the bank bailouts of 2008. Why? Because when you give money to the people, you empower the market to decide who survives. Workers started moving to where demand was growing and away from areas where demand was shrinking. This encouraged a form of creative destruction. If a company was bad, people didn't spend their stimulus money there, and it failed. If a job was terrible, the worker had a safety cushion to quit and find a better one. This is how you support the economy, the people, without supporting the parasites, the zombie corporations. This leads us to the core principle of a healthy downturn. Economic downturns will always hurt, but the question is, who feels the pain first? In a just capitalist system, the people who should feel it first are the businesses and investors who took the risks, not the workers who had no say in any of it. Helping regular people through a recession isn't just good social policy, it's good economic policy. Keeping workers employed and solvent keeps productivity up and spending power alive. Conversely, letting deadweight companies shut down might be painful in the short term, but it is what makes innovation and long-term growth possible. We have to stop treating the stock market as the economy. We have to stop treating corporate bankruptcy as the national emergency. If we had the courage to let the forest burn naturally, the asset owners would lose their unearned wealth, prices would fall back to reality, and the working class would finally have a chance to buy in at a fair price. But courage is a rare currency. Politicians and central banks are often reluctant to do this, because there is a belief that anything that could slow down productivity could put one country behind the next. They are terrified that if they let the fire burn, they will lose control of the blaze, so they won't do it. They will choose the easy way out, again and again, and because they refuse to choose the small fire, they are forcing us all to march toward the inferno. Now, if you are hoping politicians will change course and put workers first, that is probably not happening anytime soon. There is a deeply entrenched belief in the halls of power that anything which slows down productivity puts the nation at risk. To a central banker or a senator, a healthy recession looks like political suicide. So they will not choose the cure, they will choose the morphine. They will keep suppressing the sparks until the very laws of mathematics snap. This leaves us in a terrifying position. We are currently camping in the driest, most fuel-laden forest in financial history. The artificial suppression of volatility has not made us safe. It has made us fragile. All it will take is one spark. One uncontained event to incinerate the wealth you have spent the last 20 years building. So here is the final warning. Do not wait for them to save you. History proves that when the fire starts, the water goes to the banks, not the people. The only question remaining is not if it will burn, but how you will face it. Have you prepared your own fire extinguisher? Or are you still sleeping soundly, believing that this forest is safe?